Welcome to The Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with a look at some of the top stories in the global economy. Coming up in today's magazine, emerging markets are rocked by financial turmoil in wake of Fed taper. And Somalia seeks to repatriate its citizens. First, a look at the headlines. The U.S. Federal Reserve reduced its monthly asset purchases by another $10 billion to $65 billion as it still expects strong growth in 2014. The long-awaited taper offers no respite to emerging markets who will find it more difficult to attract funds in the absence of Fed stimulus. India, South Africa, and Turkey raised interest rates to stabilize their weak currencies. Stocks across Asia closed in the red today, with the Nikkei down 2.45%. More on this following the headlines. Google sold the Motorola handset business it acquired nearly 2 years ago to China's Lenovo Group for $2.91 billion. The internet company had acquired Motorola Mobility for $12.5 billion and will retain the vast majority of Motorola's patent portfolio. The deal propels Lenovo to a distant third place in the global smartphone market behind Samsung. As Facebook celebrates its 10th birthday, it also celebrates a strong rise in revenue. Advertisers on Facebook boosted revenues to $7.9 billion in 2013, a 76% rise. Earnings shot up 82% as advertisers rushed to take advantage of Facebook's deep data analytics to 1 billion plus users globally.
Thinking about Facebook as a business and how much advertising ultimately can you throw at the users, I think we certainly have been surprised at how they've been able to accelerate and really push the gas pedal and create compelling advertising products. So we've seen great acceleration. For example, we've seen 25% advertising growth on a per user basis quarter over quarter. That's tremendous. So that's driven both by pricing and additional advertising product.
An Israel-based SodaStream invokes the wrath of pro-Palestinian activists as celebrity actress Scarlett Johansson becomes the company's global brand ambassador. In a surprise move, Johansson left her ambassador role with Oxfam International, which opposes Israeli companies with ties in the West Bank. She said she has a fundamental difference of opinion in regards to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that seeks to isolate the Jewish state. SodaStream sees itself as a real peacemaker, employing West Bank Palestinians alongside Jewish and Arab residents of Israel. The Nasdaq-listed company said it is the largest employer of Palestinians in the region and offers wages based on Israeli law, which are higher than those paid by the Palestinian Authority.
We are in contact with the Israeli workers. We succeeded in showing them what is the Palestinian worker line. Show them what they didn't know. They didn't know about us because they had the impression that maybe we were terrorists, maybe we were troublemakers, maybe based on the first Intifada or the second or the third. But they know how to deal with us and who we are.
As the U.S. Federal Reserve slowly diminishes its stimulus plan, emerging market countries struggle to attract new funding amid financial turmoil. Daniel Roth has the story.
There's panic in emerging market countries as South African, Turkish, Russian, Indian, and Argentinian currencies continue to fall in relation to the dollar. Over the last 3 months, the MSCI Emerging Markets Index has lost about 9%, and the value of the Turkish lira has fallen even 15% during the same period. The policy of the United States Federal Reserve is pointed. After massively supporting the economy through the purchasing of government debt, the U.S. central bank is putting its printing press to rest. Consequently, there's less liquidity in emerging markets where the dollar is a safe haven, and therefore fewer investors. Capital is exiting markets such as Argentina, India, and Indonesia, and it could catch up with the U.S.
That what happens in those countries can have a contagion all the way back to the U.S. One of the major reasons is that many of our large Fortune 100 companies, the reality is that half of their revenues come from abroad.
To boost local currencies, central banks in Indonesia, Serbia, Russia, and Turkey are re-injecting cash. The Turkish central bank is moving forward with the policy despite opposition from the Turkish government, while in South Africa it may be a more invited choice.
It's, again, a prudent decision that will certainly work towards the rebalancing of this economy. It will probably be a bit painful for households and consumers that are already burdened with both inflation and increased costs. But on the whole, we would welcome this decision and think that it's the start of more to come. But we would welcome this interest rate hike cycle as one that's prudent and aimed at longer-term stability for both the purchasing power of our currency as well as inflation.
Inflation is spreading. It's approaching 30% in Argentina and 15% in India. It's possible that the more established economies in Europe and North America may be at risk.
I think they're quite different, separate issues. I don't think that there will be any contagion coming from those kind of risks in emerging economies back to the Eurozone. No.
Some economists suggest that the Fed's policy is not alone culpable for capital flight from emerging countries. Political instability in places like Turkey and Ukraine, the decline in Chinese manufacturing, and the social crisis in South Africa are all contributing factors that may become more prevalent in their impact as time marches forward.
We're joined now by financial analyst Lionel Freeth for a discussion on the emerging markets in the wake of the Federal Reserve's stimulus taper. So, Lionel, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Manny.
Are all the emerging markets affected the same way by this taper?
I think emerging market, it's a term. We usually call it BRICS, which was actually a term invented 10 years ago by a financial analyst from Goldman Sachs, for Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and they added afterwards Africa, okay? So you don't have the same drivers in each economy, and I think It's very important to understand that. Today we're speaking about crisis in emerging market, but markets are completely different. Let me take you an example. Brazil was top of the class, ranked number 6 in the world in terms of economy, because the real was over-evaluated, because they were big producer of commodities, mainly soya and iron to China. But look what's happening today to Brazil. China is buying less commodity. The real went down 30%. You add on the top of that, the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympic Games in 2016 with great expectation about infrastructure of the country. It cost a lot of money, and we saw a lot of demonstration of people saying, what are you doing with public money? You're doing infrastructure for entertainment. And you had the last factor, they had the discovery of gas in Brazil for a long time, but in between the time you do a discovery of gas and the time that it's impacted in the GDP, it's 10 years. So that's why you have disappointment today with many emerging markets.
Should we expect a new Asian flu?
Really good question. Today, the same financial analyst from Goldman that actually left Goldman Sachs, Jim O'Neill, that created the BRICS concept, which is not so relevant today, invented a new concept, which is called MINS. MINS standing for Mexico, Indonesia, with also Turkey and Nigeria. And if you take the countries, what they have in common, they have geographic strategic location. Mexico is in between the States and South America. It took Indonesia, it's close to Asia. We take Nigeria in Africa, today is before South Africa in terms of GDP. It's $500 billion GDP, which is amazing. But you see that all those economies are excellent drivers, growth, but they have key challenges as well.
I see, okay. And is it likely that the financial turmoil that we see now is going to boomerang back to the U.S. economy?
U.S. economy is amazing in the fact that it's driven mostly by the Fed. Bear Bernanke did a super job, Janet Yellen also, pouring $80 billion in the economy each month, plus having almost a zero rate policy, and which is creating a lot of stimulus for the economy to go ahead. Plus the gas, the shale gas story, which is dividing by 4 the cost of U.S. production.
Right.
And basically you have U.S. corporates that are taking back assets located abroad to put it back in the States. And this creates wealth for the workers and for the shareholders. So I think the U.S. economy today is in a good shape, and in the future is going to strengthen again.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Lionel, for those comments. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Richard.
Thank you. We move on to Somalia, where the government is encouraging Somalis across the world to return home and be part of the reconstruction process. More in the following report.
Abdul Qadir Abdul lived in London for 23 years before deciding to pack up and return to his homeland. He now owns a hair salon in the capital of his home country, Somalia.
The difference between Bristol and Mogadishu is huge, both from a social and commercial perspective. Currently, breaking into Mogadishu market is far more challenging due to the effects of the prolonged civil war. However, Bristol also have challenges. The extremely long work hours made it very difficult for me to spend time with my family and friends. Well, Somalia is home, and I feel like the struggles and sacrifices which are faced here are far more worthwhile.
The civil war has emptied state coffers. The al-Shabaab rebels held parts of the capital and other major urban areas of southern and central Somalia for about 2 years until they were pushed out and weakened by a military offensive led by African peacekeepers and government forces. Al-Shabaab have since taken up posts in rural areas, and the government has sought to attract foreign investment to finance energy projects and large-scale transportation plans. The Somali government is encouraging its citizens throughout the world to return home and take part in the reconstruction process.
This is the best time to come and invest. You have a benefit of not being taxed. You have the benefit of getting lands if you want industry, or you want to start your own factories, or you want to start your hospitality businesses, or whether you start companies. This is the time to get, because it is cheaper now than later.
But even today, al-Shabaab fighters continue to carry out suicide attacks, and soldiers are a regular sight. Armored patrols work to maintain order in the streets of Mogadishu. At this point in time, Somalia has much to build toward. Only 10% of its roads are paved, and 95% of the 10 million inhabitants of the country do not have electricity.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth for a look at the international media in Media Watch. So Daniel, what do you have for us today?
Today, as often, we're talking about inequality.
Right.
Something that we on this show have tackled for months now, and is now being spoken about everywhere. It was the talk of the town, the State of the Union address.
Right.
It was last week, the Davos World Economic Forum, the big deal. The Pope's been dealing with it.
Yeah.
Maybe because he's been watching our show. Who knows?
I think he's inspired.
It's entirely possible, but it's the biggest deal right now.
Right.
The Oxfam, who's in the news also for the SodaStream thing, actually last week had this amazing strategic placement of this 85 people owning the same wealth as 3.5 million bottom of the poor. And so actually they can't, this is the quote, is, "We live in a world where the 85 richest people own the wealth of half of the world's population. In the U.S., the increase in the income share of the top 1% is at its highest level since the eve of the Great Depression."
Wow.
And this is really ricocheting through the media right now. It's the big deal.
Isn't it essentially that because of the technological revolution and because of the world, the way that the financial system works today, differently maybe from before, it's much easier for people to make a whole lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
Look at Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, he went from practically being a nobody. I mean, he wasn't exactly poor, but to being this multi-billion-dollar, dude.
Yeah, well, one of the things that happens in great changes in the way the world works in the Industrial Revolution, the same thing happened. Money was siphoned up until kind of unions and regulation re-allotted the wealth.
Right.
And the similar thing is happening now in the digital revolution, where digital industrialists like Mark Zuckerberg are really sucking up the wealth.
So are the unions in the making?
There's different kind of theories right now. Whereas in the 20th century, minimum wage and unionizing were kind of the way of dealing with this. Now people are talking about, with homeless people, not putting homeless people on welfare, but actually just giving them apartments. In Utah, this is one of the things that they're looking at, and they say it's actually going to be cheaper and has more long-term success potential than welfare programs. Is literally just giving someone an apartment. In Switzerland, they're talking about having a minimum income as opposed to a minimum wage.
Right.
So everyone will get some money to live.
Now let me challenge you here for a second, because I actually saw a talk back to one of these articles, and the person said, well, it doesn't make sense that I should make more money than the guy who serves me the burger at McDonald's, since I went to school and I became a lawyer and I spent all these years, and it doesn't make sense that this guy, who's an engineer who figured out how to make XYZ technology should make so much more money than me. Now, what do you have to say to that?
The question is not we can get into what's worth what, and that's a question of values. And
Right.
you know, oftentimes people say, well, why aren't teachers making more than actors, for example?
Right.
But the real question here is, do we need to live in a society where failing the game or losing the game results in starvation and death? Or do we have the kind of wealth that we can spread around that can ensure that maybe if we still want a game, a capitalist game where
Right.
people are competing, maybe the losing prize doesn't
Right.
need to be dying and living on the streets.
Clearly, there's this whole social unrest all over the world. People are not happy, and
Yeah.
it's everywhere. But it doesn't seem to have really been so effective. What lies ahead?
I think we're really in the beginning of that. These kind of pangs that are happening because inequality is the talk of the town. It's the beginning of those pangs.
Okay, well, that's the beginning, and this is the end. Thank you very much for watching. Please do send us your comments via the Facebook site, Twitter, and our website, and join us again next week.